On January 26, 1808, soldiers marched through Sydney with fixed bayonets, not to defend the colony, but to arrest their own governor. The crime? He tried to stop them from using rum as money. Hey, I'm Michael, and welcome to Hoodie History, where I explore the fascinating and sometimes absurd stories of the past. It's great to have you here. Today, I'm diving into one of the most bizarre political upheavals in British colonial history, the only successful military coup ever staged on Australian soil. This is the story of how a bunch of soldiers, a stubborn sea captain, and an awful lot of rum brought down a government and held power for 2 years. It's 1808, and Australia is a rough frontier colony where rum has literally become money. The Governor of New South Wales tries to clean things up, but what happens? The military arrests him and takes over. It's almost like something out of a Caribbean pirate movie, except it happened in Sydney, and the consequences would reshape Australian history forever. To understand how we ended up with soldiers overthrowing their governor, we need to picture early Sydney, and it wasn't the gleaming harbour city that we know today. In the early 1800s, New South Wales was still primarily a penal colony, barely 20 years old and struggling to survive. The population was a volatile mix of convicts, ex-convicts, free settlers, and the military unit tasked with keeping order, the New South Wales Corps. Here's where things get interesting. Because of a chronic shortage of official currency, rum had become the colony's unofficial money. People were literally paying for goods and services with bottles of spirits. Imagine trying to buy groceries today with a hip flask, and you'll get the idea of how bizarre this economy was. The New South Wales Corps, nicknamed the Rum Corps, controlled this lucrative trade. They imported rum from India and the Cape Colony, then sold it at massive profits to colonists desperate for both alcohol and a medium of exchange. These weren't just soldiers, they were entrepreneurs running what was essentially a monopoly on both law enforcement and the local economy. And into this powder keg of competing interests sailed one of the most famous and famously difficult naval officers in British history. In August 1806, Captain William Bligh arrived in Sydney as the colony's new governor. This is the same man who survived the most famous mutiny in naval history when Fletcher Christian and the crew of HMS Bounty set him adrift in a small boat. You'd think surviving 18 years after the Bounty mutiny would have taught Bligh something about managing difficult subordinates, but apparently not. The man who'd been thrown off his own ship for being an authoritarian micromanager was about to try the same approach on an entire colony. Bligh came with specific orders from London: clean up the colony's chaotic economy, end the rum trade, and establish proper British law and order. Noble goals, but he was essentially being asked to dismantle the entire power structure that kept the colony running. The governor wasted no time making enemies. Within months, he'd clashed with prominent settlers, challenged the military's business interests, and generally managed to irritate everyone who mattered in colonial society. You might say that's classic Bligh. But the real trouble started when he set his sights on one particular colonist, John Macarthur. John Macarthur was everything Bligh wasn't: charming, well-connected, and absolutely ruthless when crossed. A former army officer turned wealthy landowner, Macarthur had his fingers in every profitable pie in the colony: sheep farming, land speculation, rum trading, and politics. Macarthur also had a talent for making powerful enemies. His contemporaries described him as ambitious, quarrelsome, and possessing a genius for discord. In modern terms, he might have been the kind of guy who'd start arguments in empty rooms, but he was also undeniably brilliant at building wealth and influence. The two men were destined to clash. Bligh represented imperial authority and reform. Macarthur embodied colonial entrepreneurship and resistance to outside control. When Bligh tried to regulate the rum trade and challenge Macarthur's business practices, he was essentially declaring war on the colony's most powerful civilian. The immediate cause of the rebellion sounds almost comically mundane for such a dramatic event. In December 1807, Macarthur was charged with sedition after publicly criticising Bligh's administration. The case was set to be heard by the colony's criminal court. But here's where colonial politics got messy. The criminal court included military officers from the very same New South Wales Corps that Macarthur had been courting as allies against Bligh. When the court's judge advocate tried to recuse himself due to his conflict of interest with Macarthur, Bligh insisted the trial proceed. Macarthur, showing his genius for manipulation, challenged the legality of the court itself. The military officers on the court, already sympathetic to Macarthur and increasingly frustrated with Bligh's high-handed methods, sided with the defendant and declared they couldn't proceed. Bligh, displaying the same stubborn determination that had gotten him into trouble on the Bounty, was furious. He dissolved the court and ordered Macarthur's immediate arrest. What happened next was either a carefully orchestrated conspiracy or the most spectacular case of poor timing in Australian history. So on January 26, 1808, ironically what we now celebrate as Australia Day, the crisis reached its breaking point. Macarthur, under arrest but not yet imprisoned, managed to get word to his supporters in the New South Wales Corps. His message was simple: Bligh was acting illegally and needed to be stopped. Major George Johnston, the Corps commanding officer, faced an impossible choice. Technically, Bligh was his superior as governor, but Johnston also believed, or convinced himself, that Bligh was exceeding his authority and threatening the colony's stability. At around 6 p.m, Johnston made his decision. He ordered the Corps to march on Government House with fixed bayonets, drums beating, and colours flying. It was a full military parade, except instead of ceremonial duty, they were staging a coup. When the troops reached Government House, Johnston sent word to Bligh: surrender your commission and submit to arrest, or face the consequences. Bligh's response was vintage Bligh, defiant, legalistic, and completely tone-deaf to the political reality around him. He barricaded himself in Government House, declared the military in rebellion, and demanded they disperse. For several hours, there was a genuinely tense standoff. Bligh had a few loyal supporters, but he was massively outnumbered and had no military force at his disposal. Meanwhile, Johnston and his officers waited outside, probably wondering if they just committed treason against the Crown. Legend has it that when soldiers finally entered Government House, they found Bligh hiding under his bed, a story that his enemies loved to repeat. Whether true or not, Bligh was eventually arrested and confined to Government House under guard. So just like that, the New South Wales Corps had successfully overthrown a royal governor. The only successful military coup in Australian history was complete, and it had taken less than 24 hours. What happened next was unprecedented in British colonial history. For 2 years, New South Wales was essentially ruled by a military junta. Johnston assumed the role of Lieutenant Governor with Macarthur as his chief advisor. They rolled back Bligh's reforms, restored the rum trade, and governed the colony as they saw fit. Remarkably, life for most colonists continued much as before. The rebellion had been about power and economics, not social revolution. But the conspirators faced a growing problem. How do you explain to London that you've arrested and detained a royal governor? Their solution was to flood the Colonial Office with letters justifying their actions, claiming Bligh had been acting illegally and tyrannically. Meanwhile, Bligh himself remained under house arrest, writing his own flood of letters to London and demanding justice. The man who'd survived being set adrift in the Pacific was not about to give up without a fight. London's response, when it finally came, was swift and decisive. The Colonial Office was appalled that military officers had dared to arrest the royal governor, regardless of their justifications. So in 1810, Colonel Lachlan Macquarie arrived as the new governor with clear instructions: restore proper authority, punish the rebels, and ensure nothing like this ever happened again. Johnston was court-martialed and cashiered from the army, military speak for being kicked out in disgrace. Macarthur, banned from returning to New South Wales for 8 years, sailed to England to argue his case. Bligh, vindicated but exhausted by the whole affair, was promoted to Rear Admiral and returned to England. He'd finally gotten his revenge on mutinous subordinates, but at the cost of his colonial career. The New South Wales Corps was disbanded and replaced by regular British regiments, ending the unique situation where the same people enforced the law and controlled the economy. The Rum Rebellion fascinates me because it perfectly captures the chaos and contradictions of early colonial Australia. Here was a society so rough and improvised that alcohol had become currency, where military officers were also businessmen, and where the normal rules of imperial governance simply didn't apply. This rebellion reveals the limits of authority when it conflicts with local interests and economic reality. Bligh wasn't wrong to try reforming the colony's chaotic systems. London's instructions were perfectly reasonable, but he completely misread the political situation and tried to impose change through force rather than negotiation. The rebellion also shows how quickly seemingly stable power structures can collapse when they lose legitimacy. The New South Wales Corps had been governing the colony for years, but once they openly defied royal authority, their days were numbered. There's something almost tragicomic about the whole affair. These weren't revolutionaries fighting for independence or democracy. They were essentially business partners having a very expensive argument about who got to control the rum trade. What do you think about the Rum Rebellion? Were Johnston and Macarthur justified in their concerns about Bligh's governance, or were they simply protecting their own interests? And how do you think colonial Australia might have developed differently if the rebellion had never happened? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story of Australia's most intoxicating rebellion fascinating, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss more surprising stories from Australian and world history here on Hoodie History. And one more thing, if you're interested in shorter stories from history, I publish content frequently on my other channel, Hoodie History Shorts. You can check it out now to discover all kinds of punchy stories from history. There's a link here and in the video description. Thanks for watching. Until next time, remember to think twice if you ever consider starting a rebellion over something like using alcohol as money.